Well, good morning. I want to finish up a couple series that I had started, and I'll be hitting the part three of the uh, grooming series that we put forth, what it really is compared to uh, what actually is going on out there among the special people like the Tim Ballards of the world and the other wealthy, well connected, and well financed famous individuals who have managed to make a name for themselves while actually being the predators. Today, I want to follow up on something that I did a while back, and I featured a man named Mark out in the West. I won't say which state, but I'm going to read what Mark wrote. This is in response to an email thread that I tapped into, the difference between state and federal prosecutions. So I'm just going to read this, grab my mouse here and scroll through and read through this so that you have a real sense of how difficult it can be on people and how easy it is to get caught up in this because you have an addiction of a different sort. So Mark has certain addictive personalities, but none of them involve pedophilia, none of them involve children. However, it can lower your inhibitions, as probation officers like to tell you, and this can cause you to react in certain ways. Of course, it doesn't really always go against your true nature, though, and that's the part that never seems to come out. Rarely, for example, do you start drinking and then decide to become a serial murderer. You know, but of course, the police and the prosecution and the probation officers who are trying to make points with the public are not interested in telling you those facts. And again, if we lived in a perfect world and if all of their actions at the law enforcement level were pure, then they would not need prosecution or law enforcement or whomever to bend the rules, create these imaginary doctrines and law that they use as much to reveal and solve problems as they do to create them for the other side. Um, I recognize that some people will come against me on that, and I don't care, because if you go through the experiences that many of us have been through, what you discover is that it's a lot more complicated and subtly nuanced. I love hearing from people when they say, well, have you thought about getting a lawyer? Well, you could always sue. Uh, Always from people who either had a very easy case that they won or they've never sued, because it's long, drawn out, emotionally and financially draining, and somebody who has more resources can outlast you, which is why you get as many plea deals as you get, such as from people like Mark. And the problem is, let me just tell you in Mark's own words here, the differences in state and federal prosecution. This is his response to his regarding his case. I do not have anything to compare here in Western State. Only met one other dude in a sting, and he took plea and admitted he was after what he thought was a 13-year-old girl. Again, we've never said that there aren't people out there who do that. We've just said that police are not discriminate into who they nail. They're not interested in your innocence. They're interested in racking up statistics. And if you're a police officer and you hear this, I would be happy to debate you on that point anytime. With mine, I fought to trial. Pleas were offered, he says where, but were offered, but I denied. My charge was solicitation of a minor, so I misspoke earlier. He did not take a plea. I was sentenced to 210 days in jail. So about 20 days longer than I was. This is active incarceration as opposed to your actual sentence, though, that I had. Prison time would be 1 to 10 if I violated anything. So they hold that over your head. So not only do they put you through the injustice of prosecuting you and convicting you when you're innocent, then they have the full weight of the law hanging over you, because now you're a bad person and they have to constantly watch you. They have to constantly come after you. And even though we don't have community correction, there are all sorts of subtle ways that the compliance people with the state patrol or whoever's compliance in your particular state will exercise control and sovereignty over your life. Post probation. Felony 2 I got and labeled a category 1, which means I cannot go to parks or anywhere where children are. My ex-wife and former in-laws wrote to the judge asking for me to have access to my daughters. He, meaning the judge, granted the request, stating few fathers ask under these circumstances, probably because they're shattered or they are told they won't have a prayer. And the judge gave me permission. I argued with the prosecution on the point during the hearing. The prosecution, of course, would be trying to prevent you from doing that because they want to look good in front of the public and because they're in the opposition, so they have to play their loyal part. Again, if you've ever been in a courtroom and you've actually witnessed these, not only in my case, but in others, it's astonishing the deals that are cut right in front of you. And if you don't have a legal background, you'll soon get one. Always confused but not regretful, they didn't go federal on my case because I have done and still do volunteer time for juvenile diabetic peer counseling, not for profit. I am labeled as on call to give advice and support to other volunteers now, but also had directors from the nonprofit write character witness support to judge, saying never a conflict or question while involved in a program. I'm trying to read exactly what he wrote, but I'm stumbling over grammar mistake. Sorry, Mark. The directors are pediatricians, endocrinologists, and therapists at the nonprofit. Prosecution would not allow the jury to see or hear from these professionals. These are good friends that I still meet with for dinner and talk about programs in the not-for-profit. They all know the details of my case. So, so much for the general public thinking they know what's going on versus the people who actually know, people like him and me and many others who know that we didn't do that, know that it's contrary to our character. Amazed by the difference in time and charges. Here in Western State, during probation, I have had to take 2 polygraphs and pass an ABLE test, the same one I've described that I had to pass. Also see a state-appointed therapist. The state-appointed therapist has told me he would testify if called, stating he has never had anyone able to point out everything done wrong in the sting and at the trial. Okay? Not quite sure where that goes, but apparently in favor of Mark. I also believe my probation officer has been easy on me for the same reasons. Within first couple months with him, I argued everything I see wrong in my case. He can't say, well, Mark is a lot luckier than a lot of people. I wasn't as lucky with my probation officer. She had me arrested twice on specious charges, which were, by the way, thrown out. I want to remind those of you who say, you were arrested 4 times? Yes, I was. The first time for the original crime, I got out. The second and third because of what they did. And the 4th time when the FBI kicked in my door because I had to bring in somebody to rent a room. And while I was in jail, he was selling drugs. Of course, they quickly observed that they weren't really arresting me. They were arresting him. And then they were trying to find him. Then they revealed later they had arrested him an hour before. Why the games? I have no idea. But the damage to my body, the damage to my steps, and the damage to my home haven't been fully repaired. Reading on. He, meaning the probation officer, can't say that, but we spent most of our time together talking about gardening. Sometimes that will happen. These compliance officers and probation officers, some of them are very decent. The one that I had told me that he only worries about, at most, 25% of the people he has. 75% he says they're no danger to society at all. He's not convinced of it. Of course, the general public knows better because they read a newspaper article about you. There's a reason why the court views such things as hearsay, meaning an opinion. Talking to other people in the group therapy, he treats me differently than others. He's talking about his probation officer. He has only been in my residence 1 time within the last 2 years, and that was to see my houseplants. This has all been a rude awakening. My father was a cop. My brother was a sheriff correction officer. My brother-in-law is a cop. I almost became a cop myself, but I knew I would ruin my humanity because of the stories I grew up hearing from my father. Isn't that something? I had several counties and cities trying to recruit me in my 20s. During my time managing and doing security at nightclubs here, I worked with drug task forces and got to know FBI and DEA agents in his area. Used their name during my interrogation, quietly giving them information I witnessed within the bars I worked. My father was appalled by the conduct of the officers and the prosecution in my case. The work ethics and misconduct had him shocked also. Remember, police officers and law enforcement of various stripes are real people. It's important to remember that sometimes. However, you do have to ask, at least I do, how many other people they allowed to be ruined right in front of them until it became one of their own. Needed to vent. This is everyday thing for me. I do not talk to friends unless they approach me. If someone I don't know starts a conversation, I panic because I'm afraid eventually they will Google me. This all goes against everything I ever believed in. As opposed to me, I lean into it because I am happy to engage you in anything you want to say. Remember, my reputation didn't end in 2018. I had 40 years and more of a reputation before that. So if you want to look at what happened since 2018, I'm totally open to that, as long as you look at what happened before as well. My first wife was abused by her stepfather. This goes against everything I ever believed in. My first wife was abused by her stepfather. Hid his addiction during our marriage. Besides the alcohol I knew of, she did meth without me knowing. I know firsthand the consequences and trauma someone suffers being abused in these ways. The impact it has, I would never cause. So that's a continuation of Mark's story. I will put the link to the original Mark story in down below here when this uploads here from my phone. But it just gives you an idea of what one's life is like and how it's turned upside down because of a police sting. Mark should have gotten help at most, and at best probably left alone. But this is the way they roll because, of course, they've got to create as many statistics as possible to keep that funding matrix going, to convince the public and the politicians that they are doing the job. And if you haven't read some of the letters from the politicians to the Department of Justice and ICAC, well, I invite you to contact me. I will send you the General Accountability Office report and our responses to that report so that you have a real sense of how things go. You know how they did that report? They asked police what happened. They got anecdotal data, and they say over and over again they got anecdotal data. They didn't ask families who have been impacted by these stings. They freely admitted that there were very few actual children actually saved, and they were quite comfortable with the results of what the police told them. They never bothered to talk to independent scholars who study these issues or any of us who were impacted by them. And when I wrote to them in December of 2022, I think it was, 2 years ago, almost exactly, it's been crickets ever since. Because, of course, accountability for the General Accountability Office is the very last thing they're interested in. This is Norman Michaelation for the 27th of December, 2024.